once again, hello everybody, my name is Julia Herrnböck, I'm a journalist from Vienna, and it's my honor today to do the moderation for this panel. We have a little bit of short time frame because we have to leave this room around 2 o'clock, and the first 45 minutes or 40 minutes will be for the presentations of the 3 speakers, and then we will have a discussion all together, hopefully. So, to the workshop today, I welcome you to Countering Disinformation and Hate in the Digital Public Sphere. I'll shortly introduce the 3 speakers for today. The first one will be Dr. Lena Frischlich. She's head of the Interdisciplinary Research Group on Democratic Resilience in the Online Era. Her main areas of research are online propaganda, fake news, fear and hate speech. And she will tell us about the findings from the ProStop project, especially about the role of pseudo-users. Then Rayk Anders, who arrived in time, even though he was in traffic jam from Berlin. He's a journalist and web video producer. He hosts his own show Headlinez for ARD and ZDF Online, and he's a book author. He realized 2 documentaries about conspiracy theories and launched attacks on the internet. And he will speak about his conclusions and learnings from Delete Yourself. And Raymond Serrato, he's a social media analyst working at the UN Human Rights Commission. He deals mainly with disinformation and online propaganda in his work, and he will demonstrate how YouTube's recommendation algorithm promotes extreme content using chemnitz as an example. So let's start with Dr. Frischlich.
Hey, so hi, thank you for having me. Okay, now I have to leave the presentation, right, and to scroll, is that correct? Yes. So we have a bit of a change of program. Give me a second. More than 1 second, actually. Okay. So we have 2 challenges today. The first is that I don't see what's behind me. And the second is that we have so few time. But thank you very much for having me here. I'm honored. And I was invited to present you some findings from the ProStop project, especially on our insights about so-called pseudo-users. And the ProStop project has been commissioned to us by the Federal Ministry for Education and Science, and it combines knowledge from information systems, communication, and also journalism in order to detect, identify, and combat covert propaganda attacks via online media. Propaganda for us, it's not a phenomenon of a certain group, nation, or religion, but it's a purposeful and systematic attempt to shape perceptions, to affect emotions and cognitions, and to direct behavior in the sense of an ideology. And very often this is an ideology that claims absolute validity. To this end, propaganda uses a large toolbox, including lies, distortions, threats, and all the things we talked about in the morning. Covert propaganda is the case when source or sender and or the message are false or falsifiable. So that's the area of disinformation campaigns. It's nothing that has been invented in the internet, but is very prevalent today. Disinformation has 2 main strategies. The one is to simulate a credible environment, for instance, a certain newspaper or something that you would believe in, and then refer to it, and the other is to simulate a credible source, for instance, a concerned citizen or a user, and that's where all these trolls, bots, pseudo-users, fanatics, fake accounts, however you call them, come into play. This has been mostly discussed recently in the context, of course, of the Internet Research Agency, Trump and Brexit, and all these trolls behind the lines, but has been reported already some years ago in the case of the Ukrainian crisis, where The Guardian noted a lot of pro-Russian trolling below their lines. And in the last 2 years, the topic really exploded. So when you Google bots nowadays, you have like this full images of malicious machines going out there influencing the public discourse in a magic way. That's not really how it works from a technical stance. So what you need to do to act online is this: you need a proprietor which orchestrates a certain social media account and then executes a set of behavior. That can be amplification, for instance, via liking or sharing, can be connecting to other users or simulating an audience, and also posting stuff. The proprietor can be an individual, a group or organization, and a governmental structure. The orchestration can be directly, such as in the case of these maybe trolls, maybe not trolls, astroturfers, fanatics, however. It can be semi-automated, we call them cyborgs, and of course it can be fully automated. That's this infamous social bot concept you might have in mind. And the account can be created to represent the proprietor behind, so there are bot accounts who call themselves bot accounts. It can be compromised. We've seen this in the Bundestag leaks, where the social media account was hacked to gain more reach, and it can be fully fabricated. And what's important that on the level of the online behavior, you don't really see the structure behind it. And maybe that's not the important question. We have heard that already in the keynote today, that maybe the behavior is the important part and not so much whether it's more or less automated. Pseudo users are really cheap to get online. So not too obvious. Facebook account costs about €5 if you buy them online. Irrespective of whether it's in a clear or in this hidden, dangerous dark web thing you heard about. A YouTube view is less than 10 cents. An Instagram follower is even cheaper, and most possibly this is not a bot because Instagram has a quite restricted API. And a random comment is less than €1. At least is where the market price is 1 year ago. And if you look at the structure of platforms for which you can buy these pseudo users, it's very largely for Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, so the most popular stuff. There's also a bit of stuff for Twitter, but representing the research, we see a lot of research about Twitter, we see much less about all other platforms, but the markets very often address other platforms. Now you might say that cheap doesn't necessarily mean relevant. Only because it's cheap, it doesn't mean that we have this phenomenon here in Germany. But when we talked to journalistic community managers, and we will present some data on that next week, we see that pseudo users are really a phenomenon also in German community sections. Of all community managers we interviewed, and they represent national both and local media, 0 had no experience with this kind of users. The level of automation, of course, is unclear, and as the API of most journalistic newspapers tends to be rather restricted, I would not expect a very high level of automation there, but that's not the important aspect. What we wanted to know is that a phenomenon which is really reflecting only the perspective of community managers, so people at the front, or how representative is this phenomenon? And we did 3 studies surrounding the election. So we had a large online panel with 5,000 Germans before the election and nearly 3,000 after the election. And we also had a series of telephone interviews with journalists. And we deducted some indicators of strange accounts online. That doesn't mean that these accounts are pseudo-users. For instance, the inability to react to irony is something people in my family have also, and they are known pseudo users. But when we look at the share of recipients who saw accounts with strange names, which were very new, which repeated always the same content, like plagiarism, we see that about 40% of Germans noted cues for such activities in the month upcoming to the election. The share is a bit smaller when we ask people for the weeks surrounding the election, but the red area, showing that people notice this stuff like really on a weekly or daily basis, is increasing. When we ask journalists, and this is not only community managers, but all people working with online media, we see that the number is much higher. So most of you will have noticed one of these phenomena when you look at your comment sections or how your content is processed online. And we also know that pseudo users try to manipulate public discourse here in Germany. During the Chancellor duel in 2017, our colleagues monitored the Twitter stream about the TV duel and the Chancellor duel. And what they found is that shortly before the duel, the number of tweets was rising. So you see this blue line, this is the whole number of tweets discussing about the Chancellor duel. Most of these tweets use the hashtag TV duel, that's the orange line, but we also have this strange nose down there. A lot of people use the hashtag Chancellor duel, and they combine this hashtag with the hashtag Traitor duel and the advertisement for a German right-wing populist candidate. And its tweets were, for instance, there's a translation, Mafia Merkel and Martin Rednose are unbearable, Merkel has to go, it's a traitor duel, vote for the AfD. And my colleagues inspected these accounts more closely, and what they find is that the majority of accounts using the larger hashtag, the majority discourse, were rather old, but a lot of new accounts were using the traitor duel associated Chancellor duel hashtag. In parallel, the magazine BuzzFeed monitored the Discord servers of Reconquista Germanica. It's a German trolling group. I think we will hear about them more later on. And they found that this was an attempt for a coordinated attack. You also saw it's a very small nose. It wasn't very successful, but it was an attempt. We also monitored some strange activities during the Bavarian election. This time, the pattern was different, but we found that a lot of users which talked about the Freie Wähler, free citizens, free voters in Bavaria, tweeted exactly the same number of tweets. That's strange, because it's not very plausible. And when we looked at the activity, you can see that they were very active during the day, and then something happened at night, they fall asleep. Actually, this is the exact minute of a server setup, and apparently servers do kind of need to sleep at night. So this is a high level of automation you can see here. It was followed up by a report from colleagues of you, and what they found out, this was indeed a bot army. It was hosted by the 14-year-old son of one of the candidates, which also tried to make some voice over there. So we know that this is happening, and we also know that it's not that relevant whether it's trolls, fanatics, other people, or a bot army, or teenagers. But the question remains, how can we deal with that? Because I think we all agree that human voices should be heard also in the public sphere and also in journalistic comment sections, but maybe the same right for voicing does not apply to automatic amplification. So in theory, this doesn't work anymore. No? It's frozen? So in, maybe? No. Oh, over there, right?
Is it frozen?
Yeah, it looks like
Das Menü ist offen. Das Menü ist offen.
I have no idea. Well, it's not that important. So in theory, you can look at different levels on how you can detect such pseudo-user activities. I think it's the next one. I don't know. Yeah. So you can look at different potential cues. You could look at the content or language of a comment, for instance, whether certain core phrases are used. You could look at the internal consistency, for instance, whether images are corroborated or whether an account is very old or very new. And you could also look at the reaction times and larger patterns. And we have already talked about the need to look at the meta structure. But you can also look how accounts interact with each other, how they discuss with you as moderator. But when we interviewed journalists, what they really do in their everyday work, and I know you're working on a high level of pressure and you don't have neither time nor people to do this very carefully, we see that most focus on content and language for content moderation. Only about half have the time or resources to check the profiles, and only a quarter is aware of these larger patterns that might indicate an attempt to manipulate. So I think we need to find a way to establish resources and practices to really do this meta engagement. And of course, you can also try to create an efficient, positive community by focusing on the positive people engaging with your newspaper. And what we find in different, both qualitative but also quantitative experiments and content analysis is that an interactive exchange, a participatory form of journalism with clear norms, is much better to create a positive tone than having things like confronting or factual information in your comment sections. So when you treat people like children in an authoritarian manner, that usually is not the most constructive way to get a better discourse. Exhortations can even fuel incivility, and there's a very nice work by my colleague Mark Ziegler that shows that this can really be seen in comment sections. But rewarding positive comments, being a good host, and supporting your community is associated with a more positive climate and also more positive discourse. So I think you're on the way to manage this situation, and I'm very thankful for your attention. Looking forward to the discussion later on.
I guess I'll use this. Test. I'm also a little sick, so I might cough as well. Spread our crimson around. Yeah, we share this one. Okay. So I'm Rayk Serrato. I'm a social media analyst at the Office of Human Rights, UN. I work primarily on human rights investigations using open sources, primarily social media in this case, to corroborate violations of international human rights law. We primarily take that, so like images, videos, things like that we can use to kind of confirm whether or not a victim is injured or killed under certain circumstances. That's one aspect of it. The other one is to look at the impact of dis and misinformation on conflicts in the human rights context. I'll present today not a lot of that work because it's part of an investigation, but some past work I've done. And I hope it's not too basic at the beginning, but I think it's always good to have this like baseline to know the difference between misinformation and disinformation, because they are bedfellows, and I think it's not always clear. Maybe to start with, they're both problematizing information, right? There's this uncertainty which enters the information sphere, and I think Trump is a good example of this, and the term gaslighting, because you often don't know what's real and what's not. Did he say it? Did he not say it? So that's kind of the first a similar aspect about both of them, is that they problematize information, and the intent is really not so much to convince you, but to confuse you, I would say. Of course, they both are inaccurate, false, and misleading, so videos are edited, images are edited, they're cut short, statements are taken out of context, and they can often be used to discredit information or institutions. So the press, specific journalists, civil society groups, governments, and intergovernmental organizations. Of course, we know the enemy of the people, the New York Times, when they issue a correction, they probably, they got something wrong and they spread some misinformation, but that's quite different from disinformation, which is about intent. Right? They're not intending to do that usually. I would say never. And then that kind of gets us into the other territory, I think, of this term called information operations. I think Facebook, when it did its kind of autopsy on the Russian IRA efforts, they kind of revived this term, and it's simply, I think Lena touched on it quite a bit, it's disinformation, right? We know it by any other, I don't have a picture there. Okay. It's disinformation. It usually has an objective. It's military, economic, political, ideological, and there's usually an organizing agent behind it, which is a state actor or a non-state actor. More and more, we find that there is no organizing agent behind disinformation activities. It becomes a kind of collaborative disinformation project. And then we know, of course, that social media by now has allowed us to kind of target individuals on the level of, for example, people who are interested in vaccine controversies, right? Facebook now has these kind of specific areas where you can target our disinformation efforts effectively. I want to talk about two information operations as examples that I worked on, which are kind of both episodes. Oh, first, before I get that, maybe some tools that I use. So I work all in open source. So I use Rectangle. I used to use R to interact with the Facebook's API to retrieve data from groups and pages. NetViz still works, which means you can go to a page and you can retrieve posts from that page. You have something called RTweet, which also allows you to retrieve tweets in real time from Twitter. And historically, Instagram, you can basically scrape private, not private, but public pages and profiles to download all of the tweets and, all of the grams and stories they've sent, as well as the metadata. That allows you kind of, so I'm trying to tackle every platform here. The Twitter archiving Google Sheet is, I would say, a more user-friendly version of archiving tweets. Sumo, which allows you to see kind of the most popular trending URLs in social media. And then YouTube data tools, where you can also use, it's an easy way to interact with YouTube's API to retrieve data as well. So information operations. I want to talk about two episodes in particular. One which is really the example of the traditional disinformation activities by a state actor. The other one, which it's less clear. I would say it's one that's more collaborative. And I start in Myanmar, actually, which is where I did a lot of research previously. Attacks by the Rakhine Rohingya Salvation Army. This is a militia group of Rohingya who conducted an attack on 25th of August in 2017, which essentially triggered the military's response, which was quite indiscriminate. So on the night of August 24th, 25th, they launched a series of attacks on police outposts in Rakhine State, and within hours, or by the next morning, you had a flood of accounts on Twitter. And if you could see these in big screen, you can see, of course, these are all their profile images that I scraped, and they're all quite similar. You have a lot of these so-called eggheads. You have a lot of profiles which are of Aung San Suu Kyi, the counselor. You have some of the Brigadier General, and you have also Myanmar flags. It was around 3,605 Twitter accounts. There were often posts like this. They were trying to conflate attacks by this militia group with Rohingya at large, to kind of vilify the entire minority group. There were posts like this. This was by the 27th. So Bengali terrorists are setting fire to their homes by themselves in northern Rakhine. Bengali is a derogatory term used to refer them to minority group there. So within days, you had these images and misinformation about what the Rohingya allegedly did to their own homes. And then, of course, you had attempts to discredit institutions like the UN. What is human rights? Is it for terrorists? UN isn't a better to terrorists, extremists. No UN. So we see these exact tactics being used. I then looked at a Facebook group of around 55,000 members of the hardline nationalist group there, and that was just looking, at a temporal analysis, like how frequently were they posting. So you had these attacks, and then you had basically around 15,000 posts. About 95% of them posted directly after these attacks. So the nationalist group uses as an opportunity to vilify the Rohingya and endorse the military's operations against them. We could even drill down further and look at the timestamps of each post to this group, right? And you see that there's a very distinct timeline there. Basically, this is when they're all sleeping. This traffic was driven by around 10 really, really active accounts that were posting up to 300 times per month. And it was primarily disinformation and misinformation about the Rohingya. At that time, I didn't know who was behind it. There was no way to kind of determine the provenance. And when I met with people, civil society groups in Myanmar, it was like maybe it's the Chinese, maybe it's the Russians. And then there were some which were saying, it's the military, like what do we do about this? But at that time we didn't escalate it anywhere, and it took Facebook maybe about a year after this to disclose that it was in fact an actual active disinformation operation by the military. So but these were the first kind of hints that we had on what was going on. And then Germany, this is a more recent one. This is in 2018. November, the Global Compact for Migration, the Migrationspact, it was quite a big thing here. These are the daily articles in German media which mentioned the Global Compact for Migration. And you see in July, when the draft text was finalized, there were a lot of articles about it. And then in November, you had this huge deluge of articles, but media articles about it. And I think a key question was what happened between these two dates and what prompted this sudden fixation on the Migrationspact. And we can basically unpeel the media ecosystem to see where this even originated. Right, so we can look at all the tweets which mentioned, for example, the Migrationspact and the Migration Pact, Stop the Migration Pact, and we see the beginning of a similar peak in early November, and then it kind of mirrors what we see in the media articles which are being published. We see that the majority of those tweets are referencing media like YouTube, Welt, YouTube, and then we see, of course, some right-wing sites there, conspiracy sites, Epoch Times, Philosophia Perennis, which is Einblick, the UN is there as well. Then this Migration Pact stopping. And then we can go to YouTube. And there's where I think it gets interesting, because then we see that actually this whole thing about Migrationspact has actually started in September, and then October. So it was already in YouTube where we found the beginnings of misinformation about the topic. And when you looked at the top channels which were publishing videos about them, we found that Epoch Times Deutsch was leading the way, IT Deutsch, Martin Sellner, is there? Oliver Janich, Oliver Flesch, and previous retreats, they're also, I would say, implicated in the Chemnitz protest. And then we see, of course, that they also had the most views. So we see that Martin Sellner has, one of his videos has the highest views. You saw Epoch Times Deutsch. Although they had published a lot, they didn't really have, their view count wasn't that high. They had maybe 2, which were quite successful. So almost 50,000 views. We can go even deeper and then look at articles which are sharing, or Facebook pages which are sharing articles that mention the Migration Pact. And we have a kind of similar effect, right? We see that the AfD is quite involved in it. We see pages like Angela Merkel gets. We see another AfD politician there. The size of the node is to the number of interactions they receive for the articles they've shared. There were around 371 pages, and this is only the top 10 most popular articles about Migrationspact. I'm sure there are many, many more. But in total, they had about 12 million followers that they've reached. What I find quite interesting about this example is that there's you're in a situation where you have different platforms, and if you're seeking information about a specific topic, you're thinking you're doing your due diligence because you're going to like Twitter, you're going to Facebook, you're going to traditional media as well, you're going to YouTube, and you think you've got a diversity of information, but actually you've got the same thing which really packaged. It's a bit like, for me, it's a bit like going to eat doner 5 times a week at a different restaurant, and the doner sandwich is always the same taste, and it has the same effect. Maybe one tastes better than the other, but it's still a doner and it's still bad for your health. And it's kind of what's happening here. Is you have information which is being laundered through different ways, and it also affects the entire structure of the media and of the online ecosystem, right? And now if we look at these are all of the websites which link back to among the most popular articles, and you see that sites like Jürgen Fritz, Titus Einblick, and again this was Vier Brennes, occupy the same space as things like Tagesspiegel and Welt, and then of course you have AfD and CDU there, where they're publishing their takes on the Migrationspact. So it's actually structuring the way the online network, the way things are being backlinked. That for sure structures the way Google ranks their pages when you search for Migrationspact as well. Okay. Maybe I wanted to kind of look at three ways to analyze all this stuff. The first one is temporal. That's just an example. It's not that relevant, but that's different media pages and their median interactions and the number of articles they publish. But you can imagine this for looking at a series of different pages. Like if you work with CrowdTangle, you could upload pages which you suspect are dealing with disinformation. You can download the data, and then you can create like a small multiple to see when they're posting over time, how frequently they're posting over time, and that's, I think, already is the first hint. It may not be, it's not. I wouldn't say it's like bot activity, but it is perhaps coordinated activity. Sorry. Then of course there's network analysis to look at the way things are related to each other. I'll explain this a bit. This is a network of Facebook users who are boosting pro-Vox comments. So Vox, this political party in Spain, they recently surprised everyone by winning the election in Andalusia. And basically, each one of these dots is a Facebook person, a Facebook user, and the size of the dot is how many times they've liked a comment. Each of these red nodes is a comment. A lot of these comments were things like, I am a Spanish gay man, and this is why I support Vox. Or, I am a single mother in Spain, and this is why I support Vox. And what is essentially happening here among these quite larger green nodes is that these fake accounts, so they're likely not fake, but they're operated by someone. They're basically upvoting, I would say, or liking and reacting to these comments, which are pro-Vox. So they're taking advantage of Facebook's comment ranking algorithm, which then pushes these to the top of the pages. You see this in similar things where you want to, I think in Germany it's quite similar. I think Ich bin hier does something, or they do research on that as well. So that's the, I would say, the graph, right? Graph network. Here's another example, research I did in Chemnitz. That's more related to the YouTube's recommendation algorithm. These are simply a network of videos that were in the related video category. On the right-hand side, you have conspiracy videos. On the left, you have videos. Sorry, here on the left, you have videos which are by the AfD. Here in the top right, you have videos which are kind of like the international far right. Here in the top left green, it escapes me now. I should have labeled this. Sorry. And then content analysis. If you wanted to look at comments and then kind of code them for what kind of comments they're about. This is a totally different example. But here's one where I did where there's like 15 different comments, or sorry, 15 different categories, and essentially kind of coding the extent of coverage for each specific media. That's again in the context of Spain. But you could think of this for pages, right? If you're looking at several pages, you can kind of code the content for the kind of content that they're spreading or posting about. That's essentially it.
So we can all get up on the stage. So I had one question initially was at the end of the discussion, but I thought I might ask you now after you've heard the presentations. So on the one hand, is there something new for you that you didn't know so far? And on the other, this is my experience that going to a lot of journalist conferences that we talk amongst each other about something that we all agree on more or less. But how do we get this knowledge out there? How do we reach normal readers and viewers, and especially young people, that they are aware of these algorithms and how they change what information they get? So I want to invite you. You maybe have ideas or questions to the experts on stage about this.
Yes, one to you, Rayk. I think you spoke about responsibilities, and I think we can all agree that it's not the responsibility of the user to counter this organized disinformation campaigns. But I disagree with you that it's a responsibility of Facebook or YouTube to do it, because I think it's very clear if the democratic structure in a state are under threat, then it's a government who has to act. And I think there are simple solutions. You could disallow, prohibit anonymous Facebook accounts. You can have, it's clear that in normal social interactions you have you ID people, you have number plates for cars and so on. So you can also ID Facebook accounts, for example. And I think it's a very simple solution. I think it would be very powerful. I think it would be important to speak about it.
I think we are very much on the same page.
Press the button. Turn it off. Sorry, I pressed it off. There you go.
All right. So I totally agree with you. I think we are pretty much on the same page regarding this. And when I say, it's not the problem of the user, or shouldn't be the problem of the user, but the big social media platforms should be the ones really regulating this. They won't do it by themselves, as we saw and experienced. So you need that kind of governmental pressure to really get things going. And this is what we saw taking place in the recent month, and I think that's a good way to start. But so sorry if I was a bit, if I wasn't clear enough for you, but I totally agree.
Yeah, that would be a question that I have for Raymond. So after your analysis of what the YouTube channel recommended on Chemnitz and happenings in Chemnitz, did YouTube change its algorithm?
It alleges that it changed its algorithm. I think people's cursory searches have proven that's somewhat wrong. I haven't done it empirically yet. I haven't done that again. No, I'm not sure. I wonder, for example, I think they also said they were introducing a way to boost authoritative sources during instances of breaking news. For me, the question is like, okay, but how do you determine authoritative? You know, and there's no transparency behind that. I think it's just like another level of non-transparency about the work. Yeah. I mean, one other comment I want to mention about the anonymous, force not allowing anonymous users, is that some of these solutions don't work in different contexts. So imagine if you're an activist in a repressive state, and Facebook has a policy where they don't allow you to be anonymous, but then you want to criticize the government. So I think some of these solutions have to be tailored to the context.
But you could have a system where Facebook knows your ID. Not necessarily the state, but somebody has to know the ID. Because if somebody knows the ID, then you can prevent like international.
What about then, for example, with organizations or companies that they are not human persons, that they could also have accounts and.
Yeah, but me as a consumer, I have the right to know if I'm interacting with a bot or if I interact with a real person. So Facebook has to provide me the information. So then, for Facebook to be able to provide me this information, Facebook has to be able to ID the user.
Maybe I can also add to that. I know that it's very tempting to believe that we can solve the problem by having identifiable users. But there are a lot of people who really believe in what they are saying, even when it's not anonymous. So we did interviews with community managers across Germany. And they reported a lot of people on Facebook like showing their pets, their families, their sports plays, and then calling for gas and juice. So I know that it's tempting, but it's not going to solve the problem. And I think the price is very high, especially in case of persecuted people. And the question whether a US concern is the best company to guard credibility of users, that's not so easy. So there was this incident when they closed the New Zealand parliament, I think, because they believed it was untrue, that they are one of the oldest democracies in the world. They cannot know everything in the world. So yeah, we need to find solutions, but having de-anonymized accounts sounds more tempting than it's empirically proven to be helpful.
Just to respond, I don't think it's, I think if you put away the bots, if you put away the state actors through IDing, I don't think you have this level on hatred on the net. I really don't think so. And if you push it under a tipping point, then you don't have this escalating effect. I really don't think, and their numbers prove this, like how many automated accounts run Twitter, like from the real Twitter.
Absolutely.
Twitter, probably it's about 50%. So if you put this number away, then okay, you still have right-wing people who post, but it's obviously going to be much less. And I think that's
it's going to be less on Facebook. I would totally agree with that.
That's where you get like the switch in the mood of society, where common people get the impression, oh, there's really 10,000 people liking this thing. But if they only see it's 500 people because of the bots, you don't get this energy.
I would like to include those other two questions, please.
Yeah, I would just like to, to put one remark on the idea of putting labels and IDs in the digital sphere. I think for once it's a problematic idea because whom are we going to give the governance of labeling? So is it a state actor, is it a private company? So who is to share the burden of controlling and governing this labeling policy? And the second point I was trying to make, or I'm trying to make, is that when we look at all the research we've seen, I think one, looking at the Chemnitz example, problem is there is only right-wing content, or mostly right-wing content on YouTube in this particular example. So if I wanted to search for a more objective viewpoint, I can't find it on YouTube. So this is, I think, a severe problem because YouTube is obviously a very prominent channel for gathering news. This is the first problem, and the second problem is when we look at right-wing parties, and in Germany, AfD, they all, what they do is they excel all the democratic parties at using platforms in a very efficient way. So they manage to get their message across their channels, across their federal and state levels. And the question is...
We have to be very quick because we only have 15 more minutes, please.
Okay. So the question here to the panel would be, how could we challenge this this effect and the capability of the right-wing parties in general, and would be maybe education not be the key to solving this problem.
And I would also like to include the third question to get it together.
Thank you. I have one for Raymond actually. I'm doing similar analysis, and on the plus side is results pretty much look the same, which is pleasant because very few people do this stuff. I would like to know your methods, how you sift through the noise, because in the end these results always look pretty stunning and seeing these network graphs. But like having all these accounts and the results of API data requests, it's pretty tricky to sift through. So what are your recommendations?
Is it a technical question?
Well, yeah, or
so we have three questions. So is it true that there's more right-wing content on social networks? Would you say that? Or is it just what is promoted more?
Yes, it's effectively more promoted and more recommended. I mean, the YouTube recommendation system has been criticized a lot, and I think rightfully so. And one thing I wanted to add to what you said, again, in the red sweater, when it comes to tracing people or knowing who exactly sits before the screen, somehow I'm with you, because from my personal background, around a year and a half ago, my personal address got published by right-wing activists, calling on people to visit me, and So when I was in contact with the police, it was like, yeah, okay, fine, we'll take it. And around half a year later, they come to me and say, we stopped the investigation because we don't know who it is, no way to find out. And then with the Orbit League, when Angela Merkel and Steinmeier, are part of this, less than 48 hours, I think, so they have the guy. So I always think if they really want to get you, they're out to get you. But when you're just a little light like me in the YouTube space, it's just like, yeah, whatever, man, just take it to proceed. So I think that's that's what I get from German police or from this stuff. And to what you said, I think, yeah, in the long run, yes, education is the key. But until then, YouTube just keeps fucking up with the recommendation system and pushing these extreme and graphic reviews, and that's really a problem. And now it seems to get recognized more and more, and I hope this will change.
Due to the time, is it okay if you exchange the knowledge about the methods afterward? Yeah, okay. Because I have some more questions. So one would be to Rayk.
I think we would like to hear that.
I talk so much.
Okay, so please.
But we can talk later offline. I mean, we can have a little workshop.
No, if you say that you want to exchange about the methods, please share your knowledge.
But I think the question is kind of how do I sift through the noise, right?
Yeah.
I think at the first level, it's first looking at patterns, and then going a bit deeper. Like, okay, so I don't have to look at every pattern which appears, but I think that's where the first things to start is like, are there patterns at least in the say time temporal analysis, and then content. So, but that requires me then to think of like certain words or phrases which might be used, or if it's images, for example, that's like a whole different ballgame, because then you have to basically extract all the images and then go through them manually, unless you're doing machine learning. But I don't think most journalists don't have this kind of capacity. So, but I think we could discuss it more actually outside.
One question to Dr. Frischlich. You're also a psychologist, and in the theory of news reception, we all respond strongly to threatening content. Let's put it like that. And this is something that has been used by leaks in print media a long time before. So isn't it just a natural economic thinking of online media?
Oh well, that's actually a good question. Yeah, we all do respond very strongly to threat. So and it actually changes how we respond to content, and it changes how we respond to our in-group. The basic idea is very old. When we are threatened, we go back to our tribe, to our community, to feel less isolated. So especially in case of existential threats, and that's something I think we have heard they use a lot to put out these narratives of dangerous infections or cultural loss or whatsoever. This can really help to increase or establish a need for a larger community and a more conservative shift back to your in-group. So that's something we have to work on, but I also think that there are other alternatives, because we also see when you give people another in-group, a larger identity, a larger group to join, this can be as effective. So it's not necessarily a turning back to like this aggressive intergroup hate, but you can have also very positive communities people feel attached to. And we have discussed, or the panel has discussed about a question whether we know what we are against in our protesting, in our, I don't know, our concerns. But I think from a psychological point, we need as much to answer what we are protesting for, what we are fighting for, and what's the ideal or the vision we're working for.
What would you say? All three of you work in different areas. What is your vision? Why are you doing this?
Maybe I think I need some time to think about it.
You have a vision.
Yeah, so my vision is very clear, I guess. No, I won't say we're doomed and we're all at fault. I mean, somehow, yeah, that's my opinion. But at the same time, I think that I would really have a hard time living with the knowledge that I didn't try to steer back and didn't try to, to put everything I have in it. So I may just be like, this YouTube guy and so. But I mean, as we have seen, and also in your analysis, and you talk about this as well, is that YouTube is kind of like a big battleground concerning or regarding these problems. So if we have this platform overflowing with racist and just crude stuff, so I have the feeling as a YouTuber, as someone who really lives off this ecosystem, I have to defend it, and I have to defend, so as cheesy as it sounds, but I have to defend my family, my country, my freedom, by really pushing back. And I know some of you might giggle and but it's just these tiny, tiny steps, these red lines that get drawn, just a little more, and a few years later, so who would have thought, like a few years ago, that we would be at this point that we are now? So I guess everyone has to do what he can, and that's what I try to do. So I remain a pessimist, but I don't want to be responsible.
Do you have your own conspiracy theory after all these years?
Sure.
I've heard so many about myself, I might start to believe some of them. So maybe I do have some Jewish ancestors, who knows, but my own conspiracy theories, I don't know, maybe like David Hasselhoff is my dad, that would be great, but other than that, I think I'm pretty fine.
Yeah, maybe I think one vision or overarching goal for me is like to get to kind of platform accountability, which you only get through uncovering these kind of things. I think it's like no one really understood the role of something like Facebook in Myanmar until we had the data to prove it, in a way, right? And then Facebook didn't act until it began to hurt their bottom line and their image. And I think so for me, it's about uncovering these kind of things, like uncovering how YouTube is recommending, people radicalizing. I wouldn't say radicalizing because there's no empirical evidence for that yet. But I think for contributing to conflict, at times you don't need it. So for me, the idea that YouTube can make, or a change YouTube could make, is during breaking news events which have the potential for conflict, is not to recommend, these right-wing conspiracy videos. I think. So it's platform accountability, I think, is the ultimate goal. And also understanding the impact of business practices in different contexts. So somewhere like Myanmar, where 80% of traffic, more than 80% of traffic flows through Facebook, right? It is the internet. There's not a diversity of information sources. So just context where, and maybe a second thing is also accountability in terms of the interaction between platforms and state actors. So in some investigations, but key pieces of evidence which show violations by a state government, and before we can archive that information, it's taken down because it's classified as social media, as incitement or something like this. And it's usually taken down because the government has made a request to Facebook to remove that content. And so they have these compliance with legal requests because they want to protect their business interests in that specific context. And I think, there's no transparency about that kind of interaction.
So do you see the solution more in responsibility of the government or from the private companies?
I think, as we saw in Germany, the private companies won't act until their business interests are threatened, right? So I think the NetzDG law, for all of its flaws, is forcing Facebook to act. It's not perfect. I would definitely agree that it's not perfect, but I think you're going to have government intervention.
So, but why then the European Union is not putting more pressure on these companies? I mean, they don't even get taxes from them. What's the reason that they don't increase the pressure?
I don't know. I think that's a difficult question to answer. I mean, well.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take the second one.
I mean, my answer would be another question. Have you seen who runs the EU?
Yeah.
So I think that kind of answers itself.
Maybe not the
Wait a
EU.
minute. Could you please explain on exactly what you mean by these?
Okay. So you have. I talk about like two parts.
Have
Yeah.
you ever heard about the fight which at the very end came up with the GDPR? Do you know the history? Obviously not. And don't claim to be pessimistic or whatever you're talking about. You have no idea what happened there. No idea. And this comes from a guy who is in informatics. I don't know what your fight is.
But maybe you
This
want
is
to
So
share
maybe
what-
I can
This
answer
is
now.
unbelievable, in particular due to the fact that there will be a EU general election in May.
So maybe I can give you an answer now. So what I'm talking is about, we have, on the one side you have people who seem to have no idea about the internet at all, running the EU. On the other side you have people profiting from the way the social media works right now. If we look to Hungary, if we look to Germany, so you have many people who seem to really not have any interest in changing this, and you can look very mean all you want, but I'm just not of your opinion, I'm sorry.
But do you have a different opinion about that? Did it change?
Well, maybe you should not ask the expert.
No, but you obviously
About the
have
last
other
10 years.
expertise.
I mean, what has been done since more than 10 years is revolutionary. And this is also the official opinion, for instance, of the UN. So I can't understand what you are talking about.
So you're completely okay with the situation we're in right
Are you
now?
were sleeping and depressive all the time? And you are proud to mention it in public that you are so depressive? You have no idea
Please
what
don't
the
get so
fight is
personal.
about.
Just
No, it's okay. That's exactly what I get all the time, so it's not new. But
but I want
you
to
know?
understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
What you
I'm
exactly
talking
mean?
about-
your point.
What has
I'm
happened in 10
talking
years?
about the so-called history of the political fight in order to, let's call it, reframe platform capitalism. And it's the only place on the planet where it happens. And now, obviously, it seems to be that even the US companies are about to follow what the Europeans have achieved. And this has been stated by the UN.
What did they achieve?
Have you ever heard about the GDPR?
The GDPR has like zero influence on the things that are very few influence on the topics that are
Well,
discussed
because
here.
it's the first step.
I mean, I can only talk about my country, Austria. I mean, hate speech hasn't decreased. The contrary, it's an increase of numbers on personal attacks against journalists, against activists, against especially women within the last years. So far, the European contract did not have any positive effects on the culture of communicating and debating on social networks in Austria. That's my opinion.
Okay, it's unfortunately too short. But
I mean, I'm really happy for you. I guess you're having a great life, never going outside or just checking, what's going on.
I'm just optimistic.
You seem very optimistic to me right now.
And you overly pessimistic to me.
All right.
Yeah.
I can live with
Let's
that.
try to meet in the middle. We have 2 more questions, please.
No, I would just like to respond. I see your pessimism and I see all that threat. We're doing a quite comparable analysis to what you're doing, and it's threatening. But I have to agree there are forceful attempts to change the situations, and we have not really the support by the companies. So for example, if you try to address YouTube influencing people, there is this huge campaign starting on the school backyards. Children, the EU is killing YouTube. So you have a double front that you have to fight on. And so I think it's something where we have to work on together and not against. So it's something where we have to coalesce more than insult each other. I think that's exactly this fragmented space where we should be better in collaborating. Yes.
Maybe to take a bit the fire out of this discussion, the re-regulation of these platform companies, of these digital giants, is a gigantic task. And there are a lot of people who try to do that. I fully agree with you. A lot of things are happening, but on the other side is extremely strong. Yeah? If you take a look of what's happening with the planned regulation about e-privacy, yeah? Which is a very important tool in case it would come into, it would block the ability of all these companies to track us all, yeah? At least not without our consent. And it is our German government which is mainly against it. Yeah? They are because these are how the European lobbyists, how they work. They do not no longer work with the Brussels Commission, because the Commission has become quite transparent. Yeah? It's now easy to detect when they got now they work with the national governments, in particular with the German ones, but also with the smaller ones in Latvia and so on, because they can be manipulated and to block certain regulations in the Council. So European lawmaking is extremely complicated due to the fact that the national governments do not accept that we need a central authority. Yeah? They have all control in the Council, and this makes it so complicated. It's not due to the fact that in Brussels working only idiots. This is discriminating.
Didn't talk about the European Union only by Brussels. I also talk about the national states. You know?
Yeah, of course. No, but the Union are the national states. This is our problem.
So my question at this point would be, what is the interest of Facebook or YouTube to avoid that these right-wing people come up? What is their interest? What did they what did they with Trump?
Who wants to answer this?
I have an answer.
We have to talk about politics.
Yeah, so, you know, it just reminds me what I heard right now. You know this meme, this picture of a dog sitting in a bar that's on fire and saying everything is fine, so, or he's fine though. That's you. For me, you know, like everything's falling apart. You have someone like Donald Trump who got elected in big part into his online campaign, and Facebook not really regulating it. And you know, now you have Mark Zuckerberg turning up and saying, "Oh well, so yeah, we made mistakes. Okay, maybe we did some things wrong, but you know, everything is falling apart. You see it in Europe, you see it in the United States. You watch it in Myanmar." So everywhere you look, it's just getting worse and worse. And you could say, yeah, sure, we are trying to get better, and we're not all
I
idiots,
agree
but
with you.
yeah,
Totally. I can't understand you really. Even I also understand him, because he says there are people who try to do something, but right at the moment where they are too weak to get into this new complex of dealing with national law and global companies and blah blah blah. And I just think we really have to think about to build new coalitions of democratic coalitions which are global in a way. And yes, and we can't, we shouldn't expect that the governments and these companies would do it for us in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, regarding YouTube, for example, you know, what's their goal, or why would they try to prevent something? You know, in the end, I think it always leads back to the profit. You know, when you have this really good recommendation system where you keep people watching and watching and watching. You know, in my research, there was so much shit going on YouTube. You know, these like 28-part video series of why the Earth is hollow, and you just get more and more and more. So of course, YouTube profits, and they don't really have to care what they're watching, but I think they should.
So yeah, the question would be maybe if the interest is more driven by politics or profit, and I don't think that's an easy answer to. I would like to include one question.
I think the reason why people, I think the reason why people got so emotional at the moment was the your remark about the EU was sort of making people trust democratic institutions less, and this is sort of the thing that we who want a good thing. Also show this distrust in our institutions, and you who are watched by lots of young people, I think this is dangerous. I agree with him in front. I would like to ask you why you are sort of, for me, careless with these remarks.
I wouldn't mark them as careless. You know, I really love the EU and I love Europe, and if you watch my videos, there's really not this impression of that I'm being overly pessimistic. Of course, being here talking to you might sound different than in some of my videos, but I always try to really to shed a light on social injustice, to really motivate people to bring themselves to just getting active, getting out. And so when I say I'm pessimistic regarding the situation we're in, it's just this all this crap we had to experience for the recent years, with refugees being attacked, with people like Oettinger being a digital expert or commissioner or whatever in the EU. So that's really something that kind of makes me ashamed sometimes. But I recognize that there are a lot of really competent, good and motivated people in the EU, and I met many of them and I'll meet them again. And so I really think that there is hope, but I don't take it for granted. I think maybe you sometimes need to see the potential threats to really get going and to motivate people as well to try to do something against it.
I'm very sorry we have to finish now to get to the luncheon time, at least a little bit. So I invite all of you to have discussions now in smaller groups with us. One last thing that I learned when I started digital journalism, and that maybe is the conclusion from you is do not feed the troll. That's what my colleagues always told me when I tried to get engaged in discussions that were mainly focusing on hatred. So yes, thank you so much for the discussion, and we hope we have further discussions by the end of the day. And yeah, have a good lunchtime and a great